Yeah, that's really interesting. I find that as when you're a beginner and you can make progress so quickly in the gym, regardless of what you do, you're very motivated. But where I find most people get stuck is the intermediate stage, where I've had this myself where I've bulked a few times, and every time I bulked, I feel like I just gain a bunch of fat, and I have to cut again, and I just repeat this cycle. So I guess like, what's your advice for intermediate lifters that might feel like they're stuck?
Well, first, I think we have to check if they are actually stuck, because I do hear people who say they're plateaued, but they have to realize a plateau is a long, tall mountain peak that is completely flat. Completely flat. That's the whole idea of a plateau. Like it's not going up at all, right? Over a long period of time. Whereas I've had people say they're plateaued, and I was like, oh, well, okay, well, how long? How many sessions have you been plateaued? And they're like, one session. Like, oh, you had a bad workout, right? Like that's all that happened. And so sometimes your progress is not like this. It's not upward in a line. It has ups and it has downs and it has bigger ups and then bigger downs. And you kind of have to look at that overall trend. And you can look at those bad workouts or those good workouts that seem to be particularly good or particularly bad. And you can say, okay, like what did I eat this day? Or like how was my nutrition? How was my sleep? How was my stress levels? Like did I do, extra volume the day before or too much volume or too little volume? That kind of stuff. And you can kind of start to observe patterns in terms of like what causes the good workouts, what causes the bad workouts. And it's very rare to get someone who actually has their stuff together, so to speak, who actually is really nailing everything both inside the gym and outside the gym. Because you kind of need both, right? You need that stimulus from the gym, which a lot of people are messing up, either from their technique or they're not close enough to failure, or they're doing way too much volume or just not enough volume. I would say proximity to failure is one that a lot of people could work on, as well as their technique. And those two things have to be combined. Like you have to be close to failure. It has to be a really hard effort, but you also can't just be flailing around, right? You see people where their curls, it's a lot of lower back. It's probably a pretty decent explosive, reverse power clean or something. But for the biceps, it's probably not doing a lot. They're essentially just throwing it up and then trying to catch it, and then lowering it quickly, and then throwing it up and trying to catch it. And so, and they're like, man, my arms are just not growing. And well, it's not that surprising. Your biceps are kind of not doing anything on the biceps curls. Or it'll be more subtle. You look at them do a dumbbell bench press, and it'll be like out here, where it's just a lot of front delt. And if you and I haven't actually done in-person personal training in a long time, but if you palpate their chest during a dumbbell bench press, and they're all the way up here, you can see their chest is basically doing nothing,
Oh,
where it's
wow.
just mostly front delt. Yeah, because if you're elevated, it's going to be tough to actually contract your chest. And then you tell them, to get a big chest and really, keep the chest up and pretend like they're hugging a tree or something. Yeah, then they get, they feel their chest. They might have to reduce the weight, which people generally don't like, but then they can build back up and they're actually feeling their chest, doing the work. They're actually getting a stretch, a contraction, and suddenly they start to grow again. And for me, I mean, there are certain lifts that I will never do again in terms of the amount of weight. Like I've done 3 plates on bent over rows. They were written as bent over rows in my training log. I don't know what they were. It was like some kind of deadlift with a little bit of arm bend at the top, and there's a lot of hips, a lot of hamstrings, a lot of glutes, a fair amount of lower back. But you know, I had to rebuild the lift essentially. I had to strip pretty much all the weight off the bar and then build it back up. But I'll never build to a 3 plate strict bent over row, right? Like that's probably just not. I mean, never say never, but it's unlikely. Whereas, I think I did that like year 2 or 3 of training, and it'll take a lifetime to get back near there, right? So sometimes I see someone quarter squatting, that's a big one, or they are only going halfway down on the bench press. That's not as common as it used to be, but I still see that sometimes. Or they're bouncing the bar in bench press, and not just bouncing, dive bombing and then like hoisting or slamming the bar off their sternum. And they're essentially avoiding the most difficult part of the range of motion, right? Like you make them pause for 3 seconds at the bottom of each rep for a set of 10 or something, or a set of 8. And, they go from like 2 plates to 1 plate. And it's just, and then they get sore, and actually they start growing. And then once they can see themselves growing, they're usually pretty sold on the process. Plus, that way of training is a lot easier on the joints, and you can actually go harder. Like I actually train harder now than I used to, even if the weights are the same or even lower in some cases. So a lot of it is getting your technique right. A lot of it is getting the proximity to failure right, actually putting tension on the areas that you want to build up. You can consider advanced techniques after all that stuff is taken care of. So perhaps adding in partials, maybe some drop sets. I've been getting back into drop sets recently again. I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Partials are excellent. I think those are going to be popular for several years to come. It's not just a fad in the past few months. And then, slow eccentrics, that kind of thing. Rest pause, really good as well. And then it's that outside the gym stuff as well. So is someone gaining weight, especially if they're already lean? So if someone has 12% body fat and they're not gaining weight, I would almost expect a plateau at some point, probably sooner rather than later. Some people can gain when lean, but it's certainly not everyone. And I wouldn't say it's the norm. It's easy to sell to people because people like staying lean and making gains. But, sometimes you have to have your cake and then eat it and then gain weight from the cake, because that's what's limiting you essentially. Like maybe the training is okay. Maybe your sleep is okay. The stress is okay. You just don't have the energy to make progress. And this is more relevant the leaner someone is. And, maybe someone's favorite fitness influencer can make gains at 8% body fat, but most people can't, and the leaner you are, the tougher it's going to be. And often these fitness influencers, they're not even building their physique. Like they're done. They're done building, and now they're staying lean because it's better for social media. But they're not telling people that. They're like super excited about their own gains, and they're saying how they're making so much progress, but they're not actually making any progress. Like you go back at their lifts from 5 years ago, and they look exactly the same. And so if you want to make gains, especially when you're lean, you probably do have to commit to gaining weight at some point. And if you train your abs, and if you gain a pretty good amount of muscle, you can look very good at like 15, 16, 17, maybe even up to 20% body fat. If you don't look like you lift at 20% body fat, the answer is gaining more muscle, in my opinion, rather than cutting down to 10%. Because often people cut down to 10% when they don't have the muscle, and they thought they would be shredded, but they kind of just look skinny instead.